Welcome to AUA Leadership in Business, an official podcast of the American Urological Association.
Welcome to the AUA Leadership in Business podcast, where urologic professionals experience the practical applications of business acumen essential for success in today's dynamic professional landscape. I am Steve Riggs, and in today's episode, we will discuss business leadership, focusing on the softer side skills that will make leaders successful. Physicians, through their education, training, and experience, master the hardcore skills of leadership, such as critical thinking, decision-making, judgment, ethics, integrity, resilience, and impact. But what about the softer side of skills, such as inspiration, communication, confidence, change management, and mentoring? Joining me today for this discussion is Mike Salvino. Mike has over 35 years of business leadership experience, running a range of companies from technology startups to Fortune 500 companies. He is currently an adjunct professor of business leadership at the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke. Mike is an engineer by training, but I would call him a philanthropist by heart. He served as chairman, president, and CEO of DXC Technology, the world's leading independent end-to-end IT services company, with 130,000 colleagues serving nearly 6,000 private and public sector customers in 70 countries. During his tenure, he was consistently awarded as one of the top 100 CEOs of large companies. Prior to this, he was manager of Carrot Capital Partners and spent a large portion of his career with Accenture, ultimately serving as CEO of Accenture Operations, one of their 5 Accenture business lines, and leading more than 100,000 consulting and outsourcing professionals. He has a wealth of knowledge and executive experience. I am thrilled to welcome him here today. Mike, thank you for being here.
Steve, it's an absolute honor. And as you went through those numbers and talked a little bit about the softer side skills, these skills are not something that people readily teach you. And they work no matter if you're running 100,000 people or you're running a team of 5. So the goal today is anytime I get to talk about this is for the audience to just take away one nugget. If they take away one nugget as we talk about inspiration or communication, confidence, change management or mentoring, that would be a huge success in my mind for you and I.
Well, thank you. Again, I love this. I love the framing again of the softer skills, the skills that are maybe are not taught. Certainly, I would say as we move through our journey in medicine, medical school, to residency, to being in practice. So let's start off with inspiration, and that may mean different things to different people. So if you could take that, what does that mean to you, and how do you think about the term inspiration?
So inspiration, the ability to create energy in a person or team that gives them direction, purpose, excitement, and momentum to execute a goal or an organization's mission. When I think of inspiration, I always think about the quote from Maya Angelou, where she said, "People will forget what you did and what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel." So when I think about inspiration, the first thing I think about is, look, it's beyond your raw ability. When you think of achievement is a combination of performance plus relationships. So when I think of performance, achievement doesn't just rely solely on your intelligence or skills, but it also relies on the relationships that you can build. So when I think about building relationships are always two-way. And when you think about that, you really want to be able to connect with a person. And the best way to connect with a person, as you all know in your profession, is showing up. In a time of need, a doctor always connects with somebody when they show up. And what I used to do when I would go and see other Fortune 500 CEOs, or quite frankly, anybody, and I had the opportunity to go into their office, I would always look at what was in their office, what was hanging on the walls, what were the pictures that were on their desk. Like, Steve, we're in your office right now, and you've got multiple pictures of your family and your wife and so forth. And because I'm a family man too, and have kids. So I'd always want to understand, what were you going through as a father? What were you going through with your kids? If your kids were my age or my kids' ages, then I would think about, like, why did you pick that high school, or why did you pick that college? And what happens in that dialogue is you open up. There's a connection, and that connection's got nothing to do with the business that you want to conduct, but it shows the person who you are and so forth. The other thing to think about when I think about inspiration is people want to work with people that have positive energy. They don't want to work with people that are always a naysayer or the contrarian. So the kind of energy that you bring to the table as a leader, when it's positive, it opens everybody up. They want to listen a little bit more. They want to engage a little bit more. And that's the way I've always seen it. I mean, you sort of learn at an early age. You can be that person that looks at the glasses as half empty or half full. So I would literally ask people to always think about, when you enter a room, when you enter a meeting and so forth, are you going to be that positive person, or are you going to be that negative person? So to me, that really summarizes inspiration. Remember, people always will remember how you made them feel. If you can connect with them, if you can remember how important those relationships are to achievement, because those relationships are literally going to help you succeed in your career and a leader. And if you can always bring positive energy, that to me is inspiration at a very low level of detail.
Yeah, I know you mentioned this a little bit before. I can see your wheels turning, and you starting to explain and articulate, like, hey, you've led hundreds of thousands of people, and you've been in small companies as well. But these skills that we're talking about, really, they translate agnostic to that environment. But the other thing that just really struck me, what you were saying, is the genuine interest in others, and really connecting with people because they see that you care about them, which has nothing to do in any way about whatever the business transaction or what you're trying to do in that team collective effort. It's just starting with the point that they know you care about them.
Well, and they know that you'll show up.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the best compliments I was always given was, look, Mike, if there's ever a time of need for me, both professionally and personally, we know you'll be the first one at the door.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, I love that. So the second thing we had on our list in terms of soft skills was communication. So help me, take me through that. Well, how do you think about that?
So communication, I always go back to what I call the communication formula. So you got to remember 55, 38, 7. And those are all percentages. And when you think about 55% of communication is nonverbal. It's got nothing to do with words. The 38% is got to do with your tone. And then the 7% has to do with your words. So if we unpack that, think about the nonverbal, your facial expression, your eye contact. When you enter a room, do you shake a person's hand? Do you give a person a hug? All right. It's all the nonverbal things that literally tell that person you're communicating to that you care. The tone is also incredibly important. For instance, we're on this podcast right now, so hopefully they can see the energy that you and I have for the topic. But a lot of times, like, energy can be basically misinterpreted, meaning when I get fired up about something and really energized, sometimes people can take that as, gee, Mike's upset. And it's actually the direct opposite. In terms of, that just means I'm excited. And when you think about your kids, or you think about coaching somebody, a lot of time a person won't even hear your words, because all they can do is look at your nonverbals and your tone. All right. And as you're delivering a message, if you're cognizant of how you look, like, a lot of people are quick to smile. And I don't know about you all, but when somebody is smiling at me, I'm a lot more willing to listen. And when they're upbeat about something, I'm also a lot more willing to listen. So you always got to remember on communication, 55, 38, 7. And just remember the nonverbals and your tone are much, much more important than the messages. And then when I think about 3 keys to communication beyond that is, one, keep the messages simple and short. Like I talk a lot about kitchen English. I've been in a lot of boardrooms and a lot of discussions where people use words, quite frankly, that I have no idea what they mean, right? Like the word de minimis, all right? That's not in Mike Salvino's vocabulary. I don't understand why they just didn't say basically trivial or small. Like that, you could have said the exact same thing. Instead of that being de minimis, you could have literally said that was small or trivial, and I would have understood this. And quite frankly, in the medical profession, and sometimes a lot in businesses, when we talk about numbers, you talk about free cash flow or you talk about profit and loss, and you lose people sometimes. Or when you all talk about the technical, which is totally appropriate in your profession, but when you're communicating to a layperson like me, I have no idea what you're talking about. So the easier you can make it such that I can comprehend it is huge. The second thing is seek to see if they understand. I mean, just like we just talked about nonverbal. So when you're communicating with somebody and they've got a blank look on their face, it's probably not getting through. All right. But if they're shaking their head like you're doing right now, then you can understand that your message is actually landing in the right way. And then the final thing I would always go to is be patient. Remember, it's the 7X rule. Typically, you have to tell somebody or you have to educate somebody and say it 7 times before they really, really, truly understand what you mean. All right. So patience is absolutely critical in communication. So when you're asking your team to do something or you're asking an individual to do something, they might not get it 100% right the first time. But if you're patient with them, by the time you get to times 5, 6, or 7, they'll nail it 100%.
Yeah, I love the nonverbal. I mean, that to me really resonates. In the nonverbal and remembering that we get so caught up in what we say that what the receiver is feeling is really going to be dictated by our nonverbal and our tone. And then the other thing that just continues to resonate with me about this, that I think would resonate with providers, is the kitchen English. And we that definitely works well. And I'm sure it's very like business, what you're articulating. When you're around only business people in your segment or only healthcare professionals that know what you do, well, that use of technical terms translates, but for the masses, that doesn't translate. And we get very comfortable using that and using it across. And I think in some ways, at least I'd say for myself, it makes you maybe feel internally a little bit smarter, but realistically, we're not translating the message. And that's the real point.
Well, you just nailed it. I mean, you have to consider your audience. If you're talking to a peer or even your team, they will understand that vocabulary because you were trained in it. If you're talking to me that is not a medical professional, I don't understand what you're saying. All right. Just like if I started talking to you about free cash flow and what it took to actually do that, you may understand what it is, or you're hung up on why is cash free and where is it flowing? Like, what does that even mean? Right. And free cash flow is basically just the money you put in the bank. Right. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's the net dollars you have at the end of the day after you're running your business.
Let me ask you this though, just like maybe a little bit deeper into this. I think for healthcare professionals, it is hard to turn it off and on. All right. So yes, I think everybody recognizes communication will be dictated by your environment. But okay, for you, I'm a CEO Monday at 2 p.m. But I'm talking, and you're going to cross different segments, I'm sure, and people in your organization from at various levels. So are you hyper aware of your word choices with those groups of people and you're thinking about that? I mean, how are you getting in that mindset and then translate forward to being at home?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same person all the time.
So you're suggesting keep it simple across the board, keep it kitchen English across the board, and therefore you will lower the bar of your need to change yourself in all these different.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to step up your game, like if you're talking to peers and you're going to a conference and so forth, fair enough. But after that, if you're speaking in in kitchen English or layman's terms all the time. People are going to get it. Your kids are going to get it. I'm going to get it. Other people will just understand, because it's an art to getting people to understand. Our job is to get people to understand. It is not to show them how smart we are.
Awesome. I love all of this. So we're going to move on. So the third thing we talked about after communication was confidence.
When I think of confidence, I go back to John Wooden's quote that says, confidence is preparation, not preparing is preparing to fail. So when I think about confidence, it's the self-assurance arising from someone's appreciation of their abilities and qualities. So first and foremost, when you think about confidence, it's got to be balanced. I mean, of course, as leaders, we can be intimidating because we're literally in that position. So a lot of times when you talk, it can, right, because they've already got you up on a pedestal. So the more and more you can get on common ground with your team to be on a level playing field, the better you are.
What'd you do to do that?
So what I did to do that is I would be very, very vulnerable. And I would literally tell people either I messed up, I got it wrong, or, or I don't know that answer, and I'll get back to you. But there's nothing better than literally talking to somebody. Like, for instance, you've got a whole series of residents that report to you. Okay. When you talk to them, the more and more you can put yourself in their shoes and talk to them like what you did when you were a resident, because look, they look up at you on a pedestal because you're where they want to go. So when that happens, the more and more you can put yourself back in that position and talk to them in terms of what they're feeling, what they're thinking, that's critical. And trust me, we all make mistakes. There's nobody perfect. And when you think about being vulnerable, you also open up to, okay, it's okay not to make or to make a mistake. You just got to own it. There's nothing worse than somebody who makes a mistake and doesn't own it, that tries to put it off onto somebody else. So the more and more you can show that you're human, you're going to make mistakes. If you make a mistake, you're going to fix it. And on top of that, right, you're really good, but you're not perfect. So the other place I go to is when you're thinking about confidence, not only does it have to be balanced between like having authority, but also having vulnerability, you got to remember your professional presence. So professional presence, a lot of people never think about it. They don't even consider what a person is looking at when they enter a room. So tonight, or the next meeting you go to, or the next surgery you do, think about when you walk in the room and everybody looks at you. They're immediately having a point of view on who you are, especially if they don't know you. Like for me, I'm 6'3", I weigh about 215 pounds, and my resting face is one of seriousness, meaning I don't smile really easily. So when I enter a room, a little bit on edge, unfortunately, and that's been the way I've been my entire career. So it's really important for me to connect with somebody and also say something warm. Because if I immediately get into business and so forth, the meeting's going to get clunky really, really fast because there's a tension when you enter the room. All right. Other people can enter the room and they're jovial and they're positive, and that's just the way they walk the halls and everything else, which they have the reverse problem. Because when they have to lock down and get into the nuts and bolts of a meeting, they think a lot of the times the people around them will think that it's playtime, and it's not playtime. So you gotta understand your professional presence. All right, you gotta understand, how do you want to dress, how do you want to look, how do you want to come across, all right, in terms of just your own mannerisms. Like a lot of times people talk with their hands. A lot of times, the funniest thing that was told me recently was I had a guy I work with that every time he listened to me, he would shake his head in the no fashion, side to side. And every time I talked to him, I kept repeating myself over and over again because I was thinking he wasn't getting it. And that is just the way he literally listened. He would shake his head side to side. So shaking his head side to side meant he was getting it. And I was taking it like, you didn't get it, right? So I kept going on and on. So you got to understand, like I said, the nonverbals, but I think it's really important as leaders to appreciate our professional presence. And then the final thing is this, especially in both of our professions, you have a lot of people that are looking up to you. And if you take the mindset, for instance, tomorrow, that everybody you interact with, you're honored to serve them. It's servant leadership. Because without your team, without the patience, without the people that reported to me, I used to always tell my team, look, they don't report to us. We report, okay? We're only here because of them. And if you have that mindset in terms of what can I do for them, it just is so much easier for people to open up and to want to be part of a team. And the thing I used to do that used to drive people nuts on leadership teams is I go to Starbucks every day. And I would ask people, especially my assistant, or could have been the person that helped me with my computer because it crashed yesterday, or it could have been somebody that was preparing the room, right, that we're going to meet in. I'd ask them, what do they drink at Starbucks? And the next day, especially if it's a multi-day meeting, I'd walk in with their Starbucks order. And they'd be like, wow. And it wasn't a trick. It was just like, it helped me remember that we're servant leaders. Without them, we don't have anything to lead. So servant leadership is incredibly important. So when I think about confidence, it's all around, look, stay balanced, make sure that you understand your professional presence, servant leadership, and then look, nobody's perfect. Don't try to be perfect. Be vulnerable. The more vulnerable you are, the more you'll be a better and better leader.
Yeah, the emotional awareness around a lot of what you're talking about, I think will resonate with our audience. The other thing that you strike on that I believe will resonate is for us as physicians, and certainly the physicians that are listening in this podcast, or really for anybody, just being hyper aware of your professional presence. And people are watching, people are looking, and you are giving off a certain tenor just by the fact of who you are. And I love all the framing of you're really paying attention to who's in the room, where they are, what they might be thinking, doing a lot of active listening, but just perception, being really emotionally aware of the moment.
No, I mean, that's it. I mean, when you and I met, right, you have blue colored glasses, you have a watch with an orange wristband, and you're dressed impeccably well. I'm like, holy smokes, this guy's serious. So I was waiting for the Dr. Riggs, Mr. Serious, which obviously you can get there, but that's not who you are. So I totally had you wrong, because you're a lot of fun and you were also, right, very warm. But when you first came through the room, I'm like, whoa, this guy's serious. Okay. And if we just remember that, and more importantly, don't remember it, you got to understand whether you want to or not. That's just the vibe you give off. And we forget that so many times.
So well said. So next up we had on our soft skills, change management, and you really framed this around evolving yourself. So take it from there.
Yeah, as us as leaders, I mean, sometimes you work so hard to get to a certain level and so forth. And then once you get to that level, you think of yourself as, okay, what's next? All right. Or, gee, this is as good as it gets. And I used to have both a boss and my mom always taught us to, her view was always keep your mind sharp. And by keeping your mind sharp, you got to be curious. Like the day that you stop being curious on how things work, how people think, how am I doing, how am I evolving, that's when you get stuck. That's when you get stuck in your career as a leader. That's when people will see that, won't gravitate towards you. So to me, the whole change management and evolution of yourself is having a growth mindset. And part of that, the characteristic is curious, but also you're setting goals all the time. All right. And some can be achieved in a week, some can be achieved in a month, some can be achieved in a year or two. And I always think about both my career and also my life in terms of chapters in a book. So I have a younger son that plays baseball at Wake Forest, right? So you always have two pieces to oneself. You have your character and then you have your identity. So as a leader, all right, your identity is, like in his case, being a baseball player, all right, or in your case, it's a doctor, but that isn't necessarily the person that he is. So, and what I have found, at least in my career, when the character and the identity gets mixed, that's when people really get challenged. When they literally identify themselves as a human and so forth by the title that they have, that's a slippery slope. So back to my youngest son, what I keep coaching him on is the fact that he is writing the last paragraph of the last page of this chapter of his life. Like in 6 months, nobody's going to care that he played college baseball for Wake Forest. Not a soul. Not in the business world, they don't care, not unless he brings it up. So I keep trying to encourage him to turn the page, because when he turns the page to the first page of the next chapter, guess what? It's blank. So I'm asking him to think through, going back to the character point. Okay, who do you want to be in your business career? So for instance, for the people that are listening to this, everybody's in a chapter in their life. So are you in the middle of that chapter? Are you at the end of that chapter? Are you at the beginning of that chapter? And then how well have you done in that chapter? Because we're all metrics based, all right? And if you like what you're doing in that chapter, then do more. If you don't like what you're doing, then do what? Be curious and get to the next chapter, all right? And don't ever forget, like the role or the title you have does not define you as a person, okay? I mean, your own character and so forth. And, the thing that's always consistent across every chapter of hopefully one's book is that you can always see that their character always remains the same. Another really good compliment I used to get by the old chairman and CEO of Accenture is I was a principle-based leader. And I had my principles. If you strayed from them, I'd try to bring you back to them. But I was always based on my principles, and those principles were based on the core values of the company and also the values that you were taught as a kid. So you want those values to be seen as a leader, and that's just you being human. Like the fact that you would talk to your team about your family. All right, well, I used to talk to my team about my family all the time because it's hilarious. I mean, kids are learning, you're learning. None of these kids ever came with an owner's manual. So you're trying to figure out how to evolve these children and make sure that you get the best out of them as you can as a father. It's the same thing is true as somebody that reports to you, right? I mean, our goal as leaders is literally to tap into somebody, get to know somebody, and get the best out of them. Mm-hmm. And, I always thought I did pretty well. The fact that I think I got more out of people than they ever thought that they could do themselves, which was pretty cool.
Yeah. Excellent. Such good advice. Let me feedback some of this and just make sure I understood this correctly, because I thought there's a lot to unpack there that was beautiful. And then I think we're challenged with in the healthcare space, character versus title, right? We have a title, but it's not necessarily who we are as an individual, and being emotionally, mentally aware of that. The concept of evolving yourself and the turning of the chapter, but also I think in many ways, correct me if I'm wrong, that does require you to kill your old self.
Okay, so let's go through something real fast, right? And obviously this isn't rehearsed. So when you introduce yourself to somebody at, a party or at your children's athletic event, how do you introduce yourself? Are you Steve Riggs?
Yes.
Okay. That's huge. Okay. Or if I call you Mr. Riggs, would you ever correct me?
No.
Yeah. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Meaning when we think about evolution of yourself, that being a doctor is your identity. Okay. When you think about character, like you don't care. It's something you do. It's something you love to do. But I would never introduce myself as a CEO. In all honesty, people already know.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to introduce yourself as a doctor. They've already figured it out.
Yeah.
Okay. So why do that? Because it puts everybody at, from a attention standpoint, like, ooh, why is he doing that? And look, some people may disagree with me on that, but I was always Mike. All right. I was never Mr. Salvino. I was never the CEO of what have you, or the chairman of whatever. I mean, it didn't matter. All right. And people saw that because I wanted to try to be normal. And being normal meant that I remember what it was like to walk in those shoes. And if you're going to lead a team, don't ever forget what it was like when you were at that level. And sometimes we get up and as leaders, we forget what it was like, when you got out of med school, or, your first, my first 10 years in the business world, or the first time that, I got a promotion. Like, how did I handle it? Like in today's day and age, a lot of people always want to, draw attention to themselves. And to me, the best advice I could give you is don't draw attention to yourself. If you go look at social media, I'm watching the Duke basketball game last night. The guys hit 3-pointers. All right. And, they're making various signals and so forth. It's like, look, I got the fact you just hit a 3-pointer. Why do you got to do that? Or for instance, in college baseball, if you hit a home run, all right, you don't do a bat flip. All right. You run around the bases with dignity. You don't try to show up the pitcher. I mean, it's those basic things that nobody's ever taught you in terms of, how you behave.
Yeah. So moving on, our final segment is mentoring, and talking about teaching people, guiding them, and kind of the bi-directional reward of that. So take that.
So when I think of mentoring, I always get to something, and people either love it or they hate it. But at least I'm consistent going back to my principle-based leader. All right. So I always go back to mentoring. The thing you got to think about is, how did the turtle get on the fence post? Right? Turtles don't climb, they don't fly, they don't jump. You got to remember somebody put them there. And what's interesting about our careers as leaders, you will either remember a mentor you had, all right, and typically you remember them in a really positive way because they helped get you on top of that fence post, or you are a mentor to somebody else. And when I think about mentoring, mentoring is different than sponsorship. Okay, as a sponsor, you're sort of responsible for the advocacy of that person. As a mentor, what you're trying to do is give them, like what we're trying to do today, Steve. We're trying to give folks nuggets to think about, to literally do some gut checks to say, hey, can I take anything from this, right? And apply it tomorrow, or apply it next week, or apply it next quarter or next year. That's all we're trying to do. Right. And as a mentor, that's what you're doing. You're giving people advice. All right. And you're giving people stuff to think about. And the definition of advice, right? By definition, the person can take it or leave it. All right. As a sponsor, you sort of always got to take that advice. All right. Because that person's their advocate. So as you go through your career, you got to remember who are your mentors and then who are your sponsors. The second thing on mentoring is maintaining connections. And what's funny is the more and the further and further I got, the folks that I was mentoring, it could be, right, somebody that just started their career, it could be somebody that I worked with for 20 years. They always had this nugget of, I'm bothering you. I'm like, no, you're never bothering me. Like, mentors always want to have that connection. You're never bothering them, okay? Because they literally want and appreciate that connectiveness to say, okay, you're really trying to learn. So don't ever feel that if you're checking in either with a mentee or a mentee is checking in with you as a mentor, I always tell people that are being mentored, they want to hear from you. In all honesty, some days it's like a nice break from what you're doing day to day. The next thing is the emotional aspects of mentorship. So the more and more you can literally talk to somebody and try to put yourself back in the shoes that they are walking, the better. The more you can talk about how you were challenged, how you succeeded, how you failed, and your personal stories, much like I told you, one of the things that I used to do when I walk into somebody's room is look at the pictures and so forth, right? I mean, people will take that away, and some people will use it and some people won't, right? But the key thing is you got to figure out what's going to work for you, right? In terms of your character, the leader that you want to be. But, the emotional aspects of a mentor, they're trying to understand how you got there. And it's not good enough when somebody asks you, Steve, how did you ever get to the position you're in? And I used to say, oh, I just got lucky, right? I mean, I just right time, right place, somebody liked me, so forth. I mean, that was not good. All right. And in all honesty, when people ask me that, I really didn't know how to take it. I never really thought about how I got there. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that came out while I was thinking about that is one of my claim to fame was always, making sure that people got credit for what they did. Mm-hmm. So like, for instance, when I, as a leader, was getting credit for a project or credit for something that was done, I made sure that the rest of the leaders around the table knew who really was doing the work. Mm-hmm. Like we used to convert these systems, especially like, I'm almost 60. So I remember Y2K, and during Y2K, everybody thought that all the technology was going to implode, right? So we were converting system after system after system, and people would have to stay up all night to make sure that on Monday morning when you came in, the technology worked as advertised. All right. So they would give the leader a lot of credit for doing the conversion on time and on budget and so forth. And I would make sure that they saw through me to that team that literally had stayed up all night, making sure that that system was available. So I think it's incredibly important as a mentor, all right, or a leader to give credit where credit's due. But also you learn as a leader not to blow off when somebody gives you a compliment. Mm-hmm. All right. I mean, and that took a while for me to deal with, and for others, because you work so hard, and it's kind of nice when people give you a compliment, but you never think about how are you going to receive that. And I think early on in my career, I'd always be self-deprecating of myself or say, oh, that's really nothing. And in all honesty, Steve, all you got to do is say thank you. Mm-hmm. That's it. Just say thank you and move on. So look, the key things on mentorship, just to summarize it, is remember, mentor is different than a sponsor. Second thing is stay connected to your mentor. The more you stay connected, you're never bothering them, the better off it's going to be. As a mentor, right, always remember, try to put yourself in their shoes. Like, you remember when you started your career, you remember what your goals were, you remember what that was like, and you're in a different spot in your career now, but try to go back to that, and then just give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, I heard this, which resonated with me too, that the kind of the second thing first I'll say is, hey, somebody gives you a compliment and you just say thank you. You don't qualify it, you don't clarify it, you just say thank you. And the other thing I heard is that some people might ask you, how did you get to where you are? And I think you've changed, if I heard this correctly, that you would, hey, not know what to do with that. But now you're much more apt to tell them how you got there, right? To give them a nugget, meaning you're taking that as a cue that they're reaching out to you.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, I mean, it's where all this stuff came from. So, hopefully we'll distribute, right, the pyramid, but it is all the stuff where you thought about, like, all right, like I got there because I think I mastered the hardcore skills, which as a doctor, you guys do the same thing. I mean, if you don't have judgment or critical thinking or decision making or resiliency, or you don't know how to make impact, or you don't have ethics and integrity, you would never be able to take the Hippocratic oath or put on that white coat. So that's like the foundational stuff. But the thing that will separate you from the rest, all right, of the people is Okay, are you inspiring? Do you bring to the table personal energy? All right, what does your confidence look like? Are you approachable? Do you know your professional presence? Next is, are you evolving? Or no, I saw Steve 5 years ago and he seems to be doing the exact same things he was doing 5 years ago. That's not very inspiring. And as a leader, you're like stuck. As a communicator, if you don't remember the nonverbals and the tone as much as the words, and don't keep things simple, and get yourself in a situation where you potentially talk down to people, they're not going to want to follow you. And then look, it's our jobs on where we are as leaders to be good mentors. Okay. And hopefully we still have mentors. I still have mentors. I'm 60 years old. Like I told you the story about my younger son, right? I'm like, look, I'm still writing chapters in that book. I still think at 60, my best days are still in front of me. A lot of people would say I'm almost done. I hope not.
You're awesome. I can't thank you enough for being here. This has been a real honor and a privilege. I think our audience is going to feel the same. Thank you, Mike, for sharing your time and expertise today with us.
Steve, it was a pleasure. I mean, look, here's my hope. First of all, it was not only a pleasure, but an honor. And if people listen to this and they even slow it down, if they just take one nugget away, whether it was a 7X rule or just say thank you or just remember your professional presence, that's a winner for me. And also, obviously, a winner for you. So again, thank you.
And thank you to our audience for joining us on the AUA Leadership Business and Podcast. Until next time, thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make AUA Leadership in Business your go-to podcast. Subscribe today by searching AUA Leadership in Business on your favorite podcast app and enhance your leadership and business education needs.